All right, so Trump takes office on January 20th. Once he gets into office, we're actually going to have a better idea for where his legislative priorities lie. Now, as a CPA, question I keep getting is what's going to happen with taxes, and that's what I'm always kind of looking for. And when is that going to happen? So let's get into that, because I do think that this year is going to be a bit messy, especially as it relates to tax legislation. Just as a reminder, here is what's on the table as far as taxes go. The main thing is extending the 2018 Trump tax provisions that are set to expire at the end of this year, actually. That essentially means just extending our current tax rates and deductions, keeping them where they're at today. But he's also introduced no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, removing the state and local tax deduction cap, which is $10,000 right now, making auto loan interest deductible, introducing a credit for family caregivers, increasing the child tax credit, maybe bringing back 100% bonus depreciation, lowering the corporate tax rate, and of course, ramping up tariffs, which actually that would not need congressional approval necessarily. And that could be done apart from a tax bill. But when do we actually expect some or all of these tax laws to get passed? Well, I think it's going to be a very bumpy ride. I really don't think it's going to happen in the first 100 days. I would actually be shocked if that happened. Even during his first term, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, it didn't pass until end of December. December 22nd, I think. So it took like 337 days to get signed into law from the time he took office. And there were a lot of debates and negotiations, a lot of back and forth. And this was also a time where the Republicans had a significant majority in the House, and they could actually afford to lose some Republican votes. Now, compare that to where we're at today. Republicans have a very narrow majority. So Republicans don't have this huge commanding lead in the House or the Senate. So that's going to make it harder to get legislation through without defections. I also think one other dynamic we're going to see is demands from these individual Congress members, like particularly for those in states that want to see certain things, like certain high tax states want to see the SALT cap lifted. You also have other senators like Josh Hawley from Missouri. He's advocating for a higher child tax credit, which I think would get a lot of support. But this narrow majority is going to bring out a lot of demands and probably some infighting that is going to make this a longer, more drawn out process. Not only that, you also have conflicting priorities that are competing for legislative attention, with immigration reform being number one. That is what Trump campaigned on, and it's really been at the forefront of discussion since he won. So obviously that's a high priority. You also have energy proposals. He's talked about bringing back drilling rights, paring back environmental regulations, maybe cutting some of the energy credits that were passed under Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. And then you also have the issue of the debt ceiling, which that's got to be dealt with because the 2-year extension of the debt ceiling suspension was not passed. So that's another charade that is going to need to get played out during all this. So you have immigration, energy, taxes on top of the debt ceiling. Now, Trump talked about putting all of this into a single bill. One powerful bill, I think, is what his tweet or truth, I think that's what it said. I'll read it here. Members of Congress are getting to work on one powerful bill that will bring our country back and make it greater than ever before. We must secure our border, unleash American energy, and renew the Trump tax cuts, which were the largest in history. But we will make it even better. No tax on tips. It will all be made up with tariffs and much more from countries that have taken advantage of the U.S. for years. Republicans must unite and quickly deliver these historic victories for the American people. Get smart, tough, and send the bill to my desk as soon as possible. Make America great again. The Republicans are divided on whether this would be an effective strategy, like putting it all in one bill. I believe Mike Johnson is in support of it. Then you have John Thune, Lindsey Graham, Massey, obviously, who would not be in favor of putting all these things in a single bill. They would rather see immigration tackled first, or some of them at least, before taxes. Now, Trump did come out a few days later saying that he's open to more than one bill, but he would prefer a single bill for all this. So I think this is going to bring tax legislation down the priority list. And then finally, you have budgetary constraints to all these bills, especially with the tax proposals. And if the GOP is going to pass this under reconciliation rules, then the proposed tax provisions won't be able to increase the deficit beyond 10 years due to the Byrd rule. This is why the Tax Cuts that Trump put in place in 2018 were temporary. It was passed under budget reconciliation, which only requires a simple majority in the Senate, so 51 votes versus 60. And if you take that approach, then a lot of these tax provisions cannot be made permanent. They will not be able to increase the deficit beyond 10 years. So we may be at a point where we just get another 10-year extension. All that is to say is I think it's going to be a while before we see what tax rates look like 2026 onward. Now, something has to happen soon because the rates and deductions are set to expire at the end of this year, but I think it's going to be a bumpy road until we figure out what it looks like. So what does this mean for you now in 2025 while we're kind of waiting for this? Keep in mind, none of this is a recommendation. These are just some things to think about. If you are not a fan of Trump and you're concerned about the next few years, I'll just focus on getting yourself to a point where you're comfortable. So if that means building up a higher emergency fund, do that. 3 to 6 months is the generic recommendation, but it's really whatever gives you a peace of mind to feel like you could weather whatever it is that you're anticipating, whether it be inflation or a job loss, increasing the feelings of financial security. Now, part of that feeling of security may also involve you shifting future saving contributions from things like a 401k account, where you're going to have taxes and penalties if you withdraw early, and switching those future contributions to a taxable brokerage account where you have a little more flexibility in terms of withdrawals. Again, this is not a recommendation, it's just something to think about. Now, as far as investing goes, I personally would not be shifting my investment portfolio around based on what I think is going to happen. I think that's a loser's game. I think the people that do the best are the people that ride the ups and downs over the long term. But if you feel more comfortable in terms of the accounts you're using, maybe a taxable brokerage account is a good option just because it gives you some flexibility. Now, on the other side of this, if you are a big Trump supporter and you're excited about this agenda and you're optimistic about the next few years, just remember that this is not a done deal. I would not be making big financial decisions under the assumption that all his tax proposals are going to pass. I'm not going to assume that 100% bonus depreciation would get brought back or the corporate tax rate would be lowered. Certainly not making recommendations to clients based on my hunch. All we can do is make the best decisions today with the information we have today, which I know is not a satisfying answer, but that's where we're at. If you're like most people, you just want to provide a good life for your family and make good financial decisions, try to take a long-term perspective, spend less than you make, invest the rest, have an adequate emergency fund, and try not to lock yourself into large fixed monthly expenses, and then just take it a day at a time. I think this next phase of tax legislation is going to be slow and messy, but I'll be doing updates here all along the way. Let me know in the comments how you think tax policy is going to pan out, and thanks for watching.